Dude, y'all got me f***ed up. The weather can be complicated sometimes, and some people might even say it's a bit confusing to understand the atmosphere, whether you understand meteorology or not. But the common thread with anything we experience here on Earth, whether that be cold snaps or extreme heat or tornadoes or flash floods or hurricanes or lightning storms, is that we all have to deal with it no matter who we are or where we come from. And at the end of the day, we all know that Mother Nature can't be stopped, and the events that she causes can't really be controlled. Or maybe, just maybe, that's what the government wants you to think. Over the past year or so, I've started to notice a lot of conspiracy orientated posts online related to the weather and different weather phenomena. And with opinions online as diverse as the events that Mother Nature throws at us, I'm sure you can imagine that there's some pretty crazy theories out there. From the government creating hurricanes, to the government spraying us with deadly chemicals to make us sick, but also at the same time to generate storms, to things like Doppler radar being able to steer said hurricanes that they create. There's some pretty wild theories out there. But thankfully for all of us, all of these supposed crimes against humanity, as some might say, can be explained pretty easily with some simple meteorological knowledge and sometimes even just some basic common sense. So today, I want to take y'all down the same internet rabbit hole that I've fallen down recently, and we're going to cover some of the big weather conspiracy theories. We're going to look at what they are, why I think they exist, and try and explain them through meteorology and again, some common sense. And then from there, we're going to take a look at some examples of people who actually peddle these beliefs online and try and understand the impact that this has on weather forecasting, weather communication, and just generally the broader implications of how people view the weather. For today's video, we're going to primarily be covering conspiracy theories that revolve around the field of weather modification. Initially, this video was going to have a few extra parts, including talking about the Maui and Palisades fires, but as I kept looking more and more into weather modification theories and seeing more and more posts with escalating levels of crazy, I think I got enough going on here, and we're going to keep it to just that. But there is definitely more weather conspiracy theories than just what I'm talking about in this video. So if you end up enjoying this video, be sure to leave a like, and if you want to see more, comment. And if it does well, then I think we can do a part 2. And if you've seen any weather conspiracy theories that aren't really discussed in this video, feel free to leave a suggestion and I'll look into them for next time. Alright, I hope y'all are settled in, folks, because this is going to be quite a long video, and it's also going to be a little bit of a doozy, as you've seen already. To get started, let's discuss what weather modification is, both what's true about the practice and the conspiracy theories that surround it. It may surprise some of y'all to hear that weather modification is in fact a real practice, but what exactly is it? Well, according to the World Meteorological Organization, weather modification is the deliberate intervention in the Earth's atmosphere to influence local weather conditions, typically through techniques like cloud seeding. And cloud seeding is a practice in which they insert particles known as nuclei into clouds in order to stimulate growth of water droplets or ice crystals. This has a variety of desired effects, but usually it's used to stimulate beneficial rainfall in the western US, where there's a lot of droughts and dry land, or it can be used to reduce the size of hailstones and thunderstorms. For cloud seeding to occur and be successful, you first need to find a cloud to seed. I know that sounds obvious on paper, but there seems to be a pretty common misconception with these conspiracy theory types that they can just spray chemicals into the air and get storms to spawn from nothing. That's not how it works. The nuclei needs to be put into a pre-existing cloud. Now, before I explain a bit about how they seed clouds, what exactly are the chemicals that they're putting into the air? Because admittedly, when you hear someone say that they're spraying chemicals in the air, that does sound pretty concerning. Most commonly, silver iodide is deployed into the upper levels of the clouds or even the cloud tops to help encourage ice crystal growth. They also use sodium chloride, typically in the lower portions of the cloud, to help encourage raindrop collisions, which makes raindrops larger and generally leads to more heavy rainfall. They can also use dry ice, which is usually inserted into the cloud in order to encourage condensation of water droplets in supercooled water, which just leads to more cloud growth. The actual benefits of weather modification are somewhat murky. It can be a bit difficult to quantify how beneficial it is in terms of if it produces more rainfall or does it actually help reduce the size of hailstones. Would that storm have dumped 4 inches of rain on its own volition, or did we actually impact it? On top of that, storms vary quite drastically from one another, so it can make producing consistent results kind of difficult. And on top of that, even further, the atmosphere in the environment varies very much between different locations in the US, let alone the entire world, so what might work in one region might not work in another one. So that was the basics of weather modification. Now you may be wondering, for those that are untrusting of the practice or are more conspiracy orientated towards weather modification, what exactly do they believe is going on? Generally speaking, there's a few common themes behind weather modification related conspiracy theories. The biggest one, though, generally follows the plot that the government is manipulating the weather at large for some nefarious purpose. Okay, so how exactly does the government go about carrying out their evil, nefarious schemes of weather manipulation, as it's often called by these conspiracy theorists online? Well, there's a few different options, and you can pick your poison, sometimes literally. One of the big ones is that Next-Rad Doppler radar, or HARP, can steer weather systems such as cold fronts and low pressure systems, or, they could just influence the entire climate when they feel like it. Another big one is that they're constantly spraying chemicals in the sky in order to generate clouds or to put chemicals in the air to alter the climate. One of the strangest ones I've seen is that apparently the plumes of water vapor that power plants put off are there deliberately to generate clouds and to further intensify thunderstorms that go over them. And a real big one I've been seeing the past year or two is that they can steer and generate hurricanes. And, that's just been kind of interesting because last year we had a very active hurricane season with a lot of impacts to land, and then this year it's been a lot quieter overall. And we'll get into that one later because there is a lot more to that than you might think. As you can see, there's quite the wide pool of beliefs when it comes to conspiracy theories involving weather modification. To get started, though, I want to address what is most likely the most well known and probably the most notorious weather conspiracy theory out there. Have you ever gone outside on a relatively clear day and seen clouds like this in the sky? They seem pretty innocuous, right? Just small, wispy lines of clouds. These often occur high up in the atmosphere and are usually seen forming and coming off of the backsides of planes. These are called condensation trails, or contrails for short. They occur primarily due to ice crystals and water vapor that come from jet engines condensating extremely quickly in the frigid cold temperatures of the upper atmosphere. Their duration and extent can vary quite greatly, usually due to common atmospheric factors such as differing air temperatures, different humidity levels, and wind shear in the upper levels of the atmosphere. This is the actual science of contrails. Things go completely sideways when we step into conspiracy theory land. In this backwards place, contrails are known as chemtrails. And when it comes to said conspiracy theorists, what exactly do they think the point of these clouds are? Again, it's pretty varied. Sometimes it's the government spraying harmful, poisonous chemicals in order to keep us all ill and subservient to the government. In some cases, they could be spraying the skies to reflect and block sunlight. Maybe it's that plane contrails are just an AI neural network in the sky. Some people even believe that they spray chemicals that can directly control people's minds. Or maybe, just maybe, they're just trying to ruin your day in particular. Remember, they don't block out the sky with toxic chemicals in order to kill us all, they do it to make us sad. Before we go any further, I want to make something very clear here. I think there's a big difference between people who are simply misinformed on these things, likely by social media and poor education, and those that actively grift weather conspiracy theories for clout and attention and money. I'm going to try and save my ire for those that deserve it. Massive pages online that deliberately post misinformation in order to further their own agendas or just to feed their own ego. However, sometimes when you're looking through this stuff, someone will just hit you with some that is so outlandish that you just need to look closer and see if they're really being serious or if they're just messing with you. And if you take a look at this page here, you'll see the first archetype of person that usually believes in these wild conspiracy theories. A hippie. And also, chemtrail pilots equals Bro, come on. Can you imagine seeing someone act like this in real life?
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, sir. Do you have your boarding pass?
Actually, no, I don't. Honestly, I think all y'all pilots are a bunch of f***s. Yeah, I know what I said. You keep poisoning the skies, you're hurting my family, and you're making me sad by blocking out the sky. You.
Okay.
Alright, let's get back to reality for a second. I know it's fun to poke and make jokes about this sort of thing, but I do need y'all to understand that the type of things that I've been describing so far and what I will be describing for the rest of the video are not fringe beliefs. There are pages online that have 1 million, sometimes upwards of 2 million followers that post about this sort of thing. And granted, those bigger pages do usually wrap in conspiracy theories that aren't weather related, but they definitely sprinkle those in there, usually the chemtrail ones. And you might say, okay, but those are just people on social media. Nobody with any actual power believes in these sorts of things. Yeah, well, that's where you'd be wrong. I've already brought up Major League Taylor Green and her shitty Wojak meme about weather modification back in my 2024 hurricane season recap video. All this shows is that the United States has been invested in looking into weather modification for a long time, which we already know to be true. But recently, she's been back at it again commenting about weather modification, and this time it's because the state of Florida banned weather modification in geoengineering. You also have Thomas Macy, Republican representative of Kentucky's 4th Congressional District, posting about chemtrails on his social media page during the ongoing government shutdown. Unfortunately, there are people in power that genuinely believe in these things. I want to go back a moment and touch on that phrase there that I kind of glossed over, geoengineering. While chemtrails are the main proponent of geoengineering, there are a few other technologies, as you'll see in a minute, that people believe to be a part of this whole program of whatever, of controlling people or of altering the Earth's climate. There's a pretty wide variety of beliefs out there, and if we just take a look at this chart that I have up on screen, it ranges from a lot of things. Apparently, geoengineering can cause earthquakes. They can darken the sky in order to make people depressed and more mentally ill. It can depopulate entire forests. It can cause autism through air pollution. Move over Tylenol. We got a new sheriff in town here. Now that y'all understand the basics of geoengineering, I'd like to get into how the topic is discussed online, and that's mainly through posts about chemtrails. This has a bit of a gradient to it, from the people who don't take it so seriously to the people who really take it seriously. On the more minor end of things, it's mostly just people not really understanding how clouds or the weather work. Take this post, for example, where they're saying that water vapor doesn't disperse or linger in the upper levels of the atmosphere. So, water vapor often does reside in the upper levels of the atmosphere, and it can linger and disperse out. This is actually a pretty common thing we see here in the summertime with our thunderstorms. Once they kind of rain themselves out and all that mid and low level moisture is gone, you just have the upper level core that's still there. And whatever water vapor is left up there often over time condensates and turns into a wider cloud base, and sometimes it will rain from it, which is called stratiform rain. You can go from having an isolated little cell that covered maybe like 5 miles to all of that upper level moisture spreading out and possibly crossing dozens, if not hundreds of miles, and creating a stratiform rain shield. This is pretty common, and again, I don't think there's any trickery going on here. It's nothing, this isn't that complicated to understand. And that's where I'm kind of not really getting where the confusion is coming in here, because this is pretty basic, Weather 101. This is maybe just slightly more advanced than the water cycle. Unfortunately, though, there are some people that take the whole chemtrail thing a little too seriously. There's a subset of people that take this actually extremely seriously. They'll go as far as to say that, the government is terrorist, or that we're being poisoned. They'll say our sky is being destroyed and that only a revolution can stop this. They'll even go as far as to say that climate cultists are trying to exterminate us. I've heard quite a few conspiracy theories in my time about how and why the government wants to kill us all. In my opinion, I think that's kind of stupid. Now, I'm not trying to sit here and be a government shill and act like they're all fine and dandy, have never done anything bad a day in their lives, because I know that's not true. But at the end of the day, let's just all be honest with ourselves here. We are basically wage slaves to the government if we work jobs and pay our taxes, right? They kind of need us around to supply money for what they do, and our labor and our time, and they get to govern over people and have power over people. That's kind of the whole thing with the government. And I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I feel like if the government really wanted to just kill us all and get it f***ing over with, they have a lot more effective methods. They've had tools now for nearly a century, things like the atom bomb, that could easily wipe out whole counties, whole states, whole countries, maybe even the whole world if the whole world got involved in our little nuclear bonanza. So, yeah, I think if the government really wanted to just wipe out humanity or kill us all, they have a lot more effective means of doing it than spraying chemicals in the sky. I think the end of the world at the government's hand would look a lot less like planes flying with contrails behind them, and a lot more like this. Despite how outlandish and batshit insane some of those tweets were, I can't say they really make me laugh all too much, because on one hand it's easy to point and laugh at how just out there they are. On the other hand, these are real people behind the screen, and you never know what kind of rabbit hole they've fallen down mentally, and that does make me a little bit sad. So to kind of lighten the mood just a little bit, I'm going to go over honestly one of my favorite misconceptions I've seen when trying to research this video, and that's people who don't really understand how the atmosphere works in regards to clouds. So on screen there's a tweet here where this person is saying that there is two layers to the clouds. There is a chemtrail induced layer above and a natural layer of clouds down below. The clouds are traveling in different directions, real-time whiteout, and this is criminal. Alright, let's take a look at the video real quick. Okay, so this is pretty simple meteorology here, alright? The atmosphere doesn't move in unison across all layers and every layer of the atmosphere, right? We live in the lowest level of the overall atmosphere of Earth, known as the troposphere, and that goes up, I think, about 10 to 12 kilometers, right? So the wind can change direction and speed with height. On screen, I'm going to put up a sample sounding you can see, and those wind barbs you can see on the right side of the sounding, they change directions with height. And, that's normal. That happens because of pressure and temperature differences and a bunch of other little factors that play a part into our weather. So there's no big grand conspiracy about the clouds moving in different directions. But I do have to ask, and I want to try and be nice about this, but what fucking point is there in having the clouds move in different directions? Like, if the government was really controlling the clouds moving in different directions, what would they gain from that? I kind of get the conspiracy thinking about, like, if it were true, like, oh, the government's harming people by sending hurricanes into states they don't like, or doing this and that, but, like, making the clouds move in different directions? Come on, dude. Really? Unfortunately, it's not exactly easy to debate these people about weather modification or geoengineering. They're often very headstrong in their beliefs and what they believe the government or whoever they are is doing to us. One of the clearest examples of this was on a post I saw on Twitter about plane contrails. Someone responds pointing out how contrails on planes have been visible ever since World War II, and this is years before cloud seeding even began in the US. But then someone else comes along and just says the photo is manipulated, brushing it off completely. There was a similar exchange about planes in World War II in the same comment section from someone else. But then this person here, who was pushing cloud seeding conspiracies, had Twitter's AI provide an explanation of their beliefs for them, which is really pathetic, in my opinion. Really though, I think my favorite geoengineering and contrail conspiracy theory post came from the comment section on this post about the COVID-19 vaccines. I'm not going to get too deep into the COVID vaccine in this video, because the last time I so much as uttered COVID, YouTube struck my video down. But you can see what it says. The post says vitamin D helps fuel our cells and metabolism, which is true. The comment in question, though, seems to imply that this is why they are trying to block out the sun. Bro, this is on some, like, when worlds collide. Because, like, I'm just sitting here and I'm really thinking, like, again, it goes back to what I said earlier about if they wanted to wipe us all out, I think they have better ways of doing it. So you're telling me you think the government developed a bioweapon of a vaccine that's going to kill all of us over time, and the main fatal flaw of this vaccine is sunlight, the one thing they can't really stop us from getting at all. Like, what's stopping me? Like, how's the government going to stop me from going and sitting out on my patio and getting some sun, So you're telling me sunlight, the one weakness to this, like, bioengineered, like, evil villain masterpiece of a vaccine is sunlight. So instead of just, coming up with something different, or again finding a more direct way to take care of the problem that the government has with us, they just start doing geoengineering and spraying chemicals in the sky to reflect the sunlight so we can't heal from the vaccine, so whatever the vaccines cause in our body is just going to kill all of us. Like, dude, this shit doesn't make any fucking sense, man. Like, come on. Geoengineering and chemtrails are probably the biggest weather-related conspiracy theory, and I'd argue easily the most well-known. Frankly, the amount of people that believe in this stuff is kind of staggering. Some of the pages that I saw peddle this nonsense have well over 1 million followers, and sometimes even over 2 million followers. It really makes you wonder just how many people have been misinformed by pages like this. Let's get back to more general, direct weather modification conspiracy theories. For our next topic, we're going to discuss conspiracy theories that revolve around the creation of tropical cyclones. Hurricanes have long been the blight of many Americans who live along the Gulf or the eastern seaboard. So, with that in mind, it's pretty natural to think that someone eventually had the idea of, is there anything we can do about these systems? That was the question on the minds of scientists at the company General Electric, along with the US government back in 1947, which was fresh off the heels of World War II. Weather modification experiments had already been attempted both by scientists and curious individuals for a few decades at this point, with the earliest examples spanning back to the early 1900s. But as airplanes became more developed and fortified through the first half of the 20th century, the door was open to more direct experimentation with cloud seeding. On the morning of October 13, 1947, two B-17s and a B-29 aircraft departed from an airbase in Mobile, Alabama. Their mission? To fly about 400 miles to the east of Jacksonville, Florida, in order to attempt the cloud seeding of a hurricane. Once they reached the hurricane, the goal was to dump dry ice into some of the clouds. As mentioned earlier in the video, dry ice is used in weather modification in order to try and locally bring down the air temperature inside of clouds, which leads to increased condensation of supercooled water and, by proxy, cloud growth. In total, around 180 pounds worth of dry ice were to be deployed in the outer cloud field of the hurricane, which the Air Force named Hurricane King. The first test was done over the course of about a half hour. Here, 80 pounds worth of dry ice were slowly released to the bottom of the plane over the course of a 100-mile path. Afterwards, there were two separate deployments of 50 pounds of dry ice into large cumulus clouds on the outer reaches of Hurricane King. After the first dry ice deployment, the cloud deck towards the bottom of the cloud began to break up. After the second pass with the experiment that involved the two 50 pounds deployment of dry ice, they observed that cloud tops were actually growing. Afterwards, the aircrew headed back to base, ready to observe the long-term changes that would happen in the storm. The next day, scientists with the Air Force decided to fly out to see Hurricane King and to check on the progress of the storm. But they found something just a little bit concerning. The center of the hurricane was about 100 miles to the west now from where they expected it to be, bringing it closer to the southeastern United States. Hurricane King had made a 135-degree turn away from its initial trajectory it was on the previous day, and was now moving directly towards the US. Even worse, the storm was strengthening. On the afternoon of October 15th, Hurricane King made landfall south of Savannah, Georgia, as a strong Category 2 hurricane, with estimated peak wind speeds of 105 miles per hour. One person ended up dying from storm surge-related flooding, and the storm would go on to inflict about $2 million in damage between Georgia and South Carolina. As you can imagine, the scientists at General Electric and the US government were likely bricks by now. Yeah, and rightfully so, because people almost immediately started to threaten lawsuits against General Electric, who were the ones that initially came up with the idea to try cloud seeding hurricanes, and specifically trying to cloud seed Hurricane King. The head of GE's laboratories at the time, Dr. Irving Langmuir, even issued a statement saying that he was 99% sure that the seeding influenced the path of the hurricane. Not a great look. The chief of the Weather Bureau at that time, which was the predecessor to the modern-day National Weather Service, Dr. Francis Reichelderfer, didn't buy it. Sorry if I butchered that pronunciation. But he had 3 of his weathermen go back through the meteorological records to see if hurricanes could make the type of maneuver that King did, and if, they could do it naturally. Lo and behold, hurricanes can in fact make wild turns like King did on their own volition. Once the case study was published, pretty much all of the threats of lawsuits went away. The experiments that were done on Hurricane King would come to be known as Project Cirrus, and you would think that after the debacle with Hurricane King, scientists would probably just not attempt something like that again, or at least not anytime soon, right? Well, unfortunately the allure of playing God is just too much for some men, and man's hubris knows no bounds, and in 1958, the National Hurricane Research Project revived testing on hurricanes. By 1962, the U.S. Weather Bureau and the Department of Defense decided to collaborate on a new hurricane seeding effort, which was nicknamed Project Storm Fury. This program would go on roughly for 2 decades, from 1962 to 1983. This time around, the primary material used in the cloud seeding experiments would be silver iodide. The idea was they wanted to stimulate convection outside of the main eye wall. The reasoning? Well, essentially they wanted to try and create a pseudo eyewall replacement cycle, decades before the phenomenon was even known about to be a thing in hurricanes. For those of you who don't know, an eyewall replacement cycle, or an ERC for short, is a process that naturally occurs in stronger, higher end hurricanes, so major hurricanes, Cat 3 or higher, usually. How this goes is a strong hurricane that lasts long enough, and of course, assuming atmospheric conditions are favorable for strengthening, sometimes a secondary eye wall can form a bit away from the initial small eye wall that surrounds the eye of the storm. This new convection will then compete for energy with the inner eye wall, and this tends to lead to weakening of the storm's overall structure. From there, the usual result is the main eye wall will die off or will be kind of absorbed into the secondary larger eye wall. Now, I know on paper it does sound a bit crazy to want to induce a second, larger eye wall, but typically when an eye wall replacement cycle occurs, the hurricane tends to decrease in strength. However, given enough time and a favorable atmosphere, a storm that undergoes an eye wall replacement cycle can actually rejuvenate and become even stronger than it was before. The trade off of doing an ERC is that the field of maximum winds becomes larger even if the overall strength of those winds are reduced. Though some of these cloud seeding experiments showed promising results early on, by the 1980s the effect of cloud seeding on hurricanes was starting to be brought into question due to new research. The main issue that was found is that hurricanes contain too much natural ice and not enough supercooled water. Without that supercooled water to condensate, large swaths of cloud growth were unlikely to be a consistent outcome. Additionally, the buoyancy, or basically the lift in hurricane convection, outside of the inner eye wall, is pretty meager compared to storms that form over land or as part of mid-latitude cyclones. From there, experiments regarding the cloud seeding of hurricanes were discontinued in 1983 due to the inconclusive benefits of the practice. And yeah, that's pretty much it for Project Cirrus and Project Storm Fury. I hope you enjoyed that somewhat brief history lesson. If you'd like to read more about it, I'll link the NOAA article I sourced the information from down in the description below. And despite the fact that these experiments have been public knowledge for decades now, people online still like to tweet them out and treat them like some big secret. Take this dude, for example, who, by the looks of it, read a completely different article than the one I just read. Weather modification conspiracy theorists often point to experiments like Project Cirrus or Project Storm Fury as proof that the government has the ability to generate or intensify or maybe even destroy hurricanes. But as far as the science goes, there is no conceivable way that humans can influence tropical cyclones in any meaningful capacity. On the surface, I understand the suspicion and concern that comes with the government attempting these experiments because, yeah, on paper it does sound kind of crazy. But just like with cloud seeding storms on land, the nugget of truth that lies underneath all of this gets beyond exaggerated online. As I explained a moment ago, the attempts made by the US government to influence tropical cyclones were not about generating new storms or controlling how they move. The main goal was to try and find a way to weaken or even dissipate these monstrous storms before they could ever hurt anyone. But that doesn't stop people from twisting the narrative for their own agendas. So, why would the US government try to create hurricanes, or attempt to steer them? Well, it seems like the biggest supposed reason the government controls or generates hurricanes, according to conspiracy theorists, is mainly for political gain. I saw this a lot during 2024's hurricane season, which of course coincided with the presidential election that year. For example, take this post, which states that Hurricane Helene was deliberately created to be a devastating storm inland. The purpose behind this? To impact pro-Trump counties in the Deep South. When you take more than 5 seconds to think about this, though, the logic pretty quickly falls apart. Despite what some people may think, there are actually quite a few Democrat-leaning counties in the South. This includes plenty of areas that were hit very hard by Helene, such as the Atlanta metropolitan area and especially the Western Carolinas. If the Biden administration really wanted to target Republican counties while sparing their own, I don't think a massive hurricane was the way to go about it. But now the funny thing is, the script has completely flipped once Trump became president in 2025. Now all of a sudden you got people online saying that Trump is protecting the United States from hurricanes, claiming that the good guys are in charge of the weather machine now. According to multiple armchair meteorologists on Twitter, 2025 was the first season in a decade that had no landfalling hurricanes in September. This is notable as September is the climatological peak of hurricane season. Unfortunately for these people, however, this claim is just factually incorrect. In fact, you don't even have to go very far back, as in 2023 there were no landfalling hurricanes in September. The closest we had was Hurricane Idalia, making landfall in the Florida Big Bend on August 30th. Tropical Storm Ophelia did make landfall in North Carolina on September 23rd, but that wasn't a full-blown hurricane. And see, y'all, it just takes like 2 minutes of research, and it really does go a long way to make sure that you don't look like a dumbass. People are now claiming that Trump fired a ton of meteorologists during the government shutdown that's been going on in October of this year, but I can't find any claims of that at all. They're still there, they're just not being paid for their work. And in fact, all of the websites that are run by NOAA and the National Weather Service have remained up and running this whole time. But no, apparently this quiet season was caused by Donald Trump firing all those woke meteorologists so they couldn't spawn a hurricane. I guess he just really wanted to make sure a hurricane didn't ruin his vacation days in Mar-a-Lago or something. But frankly, I fear the day that these people actually do some research on the crazy that tropical cyclones can do on their own volition. For example, Tropical Storm Faye from 2008 right here. Now, if you told me that this would be steered by a politician that just really hated Florida, I'd probably believe you. Honestly, the funniest thing to me about these types of claims are the idea that every president just knows how to operate technology that can steer hurricanes, or that they care about the weather literally at all. Even funnier is the idea that the last administration had the weather equivalent of a weapon of mass destruction, and they just kind of handed it over to the dude they've been saying is a modern-day Hitler equivalent? Oh god, I can only imagine what'll happen when Trump realizes he can weaponize hurricanes for nefarious means. I was gonna follow that segment up with a joke skit where Donald Trump was going to tell some government goon to use an Xbox controller to steer a hurricane away from Mar-a-Lago so he can go golfing for the weekend, while at the same time having a Category 5 hurricane just rake the entire western seaboard to get rid of the radical left liberals that live over there. But unfortunately, I'm bad at voice impressions, and all of the TTS or AI voice generation services online either had a paywall or told me I couldn't use Trump's voice because apparently making fun of the president is off limits, but you can generate pretty much anyone else saying whatever the hell that you want them to. So yeah, that's kind of unfortunate, so we don't get a skit out of that one. It's sad. I thought it was kind of funny. It's always interesting to watch conspiracy theorists trample over each other in their beliefs. One moment, Trump is the savior of the United States, protecting us all from hurricanes. The next, this very same administration apparently generated a typhoon, which started out all the way in the western Pacific Ocean, by the way, to specifically devastate Alaska. This tweet here states that a typhoon shouldn't survive Arctic waters, but it got stronger. Radar data vanished as well, which is very suspicious. Well, for starters, he's right about one thing. A typhoon shouldn't survive such cold waters that far north in the Pacific Ocean, just like when hurricanes go too far north in the Atlantic Ocean. But that's because a typhoon didn't make it to Alaska. For those of you who are unaware, a typhoon is just what they call tropical cyclones in the western Pacific. Typhoon Heilong was a powerful Category 4 equivalent typhoon off the coast of Japan, which thankfully didn't make direct landfall on their mainland. Instead, the storm curved eastward out into the open Pacific and became an extratropical cyclone as it moved over cooler waters. This is a common and natural process that many tropical cyclones undergo when they lose their tropical characteristics, such as having a warm core low in the center of the cyclone. Extratropical cyclones are more in line with the type of mid-latitude cyclones we see tear across the United States in the winter and springtime primarily. They have frontal boundaries and are powered by the contrast of warm and cold air rather than through the release of latent heat. However, this transition does not lead to an inherently weaker storm. In fact, an argument can be made that the storm can become stronger or more impactful, such as by increasing the wind field. Also, that claim about radar data just disappearing randomly, radars don't have infinite range, and we usually don't stick NEXRAD sites out in the middle of the ocean. So yeah, it would have been a bit hard to track over said open ocean. Even so, saying radar data vanished is just a bold-faced lie. There are multiple radar sites in the state of Alaska, and they did in fact show the cyclone impacting the state. Look, I can pull up some archival radar data on RadarScope right here. You can see the outer bands of the cyclone impacting the state. This dude has almost 200,000 followers on Twitter, by the way. Apparently he posts just truth, according to his header. Well, I just caught your ass in a massive lie. And I have to say, people like this make me sick to my stomach. It's disgusting to deliberately post misinformation for the sake of clout, money, or just for the love of the grift. Also, you're kind of profiting off people's suffering, which is also very disgusting. With all of this talk about creating, controlling, and steering tropical cyclones, you may be wondering, how exactly would someone go about doing such a thing? Hurricanes are incredibly large, powerful weather systems, almost unfathomably so. According to NASA, the average hurricane will produce the equivalent energy output of over 10,000 nuclear bombs over the course of its life. That is an inconceivable amount of energy. So I'd imagine you need something incredibly powerful to even slightly influence something that gargantuan. When it comes to the conspiracy theorists, there are two primary technologies that are often cited as having the ability to control or influence the weather. First off is NEXRAD radar. NEXRAD stands for Next Generation Weather Radar, and these are the radar sites that are stationed primarily across the United States, but are also in some other regions of the world. They are jointly operated by the National Weather Service, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the U.S. Air Force. NEXRAD radars are the third generation of weather radars, with the current model, the WSR-88D, being able to detect both precipitation and wind, both the direction and the speed that it's moving in. So how does NEXRAD radar work? To put it simply, NEXRAD sites will send out a pulse of microwave energy in all directions. If the radar beam impacts an object in the sky, such as rain droplets or other small particles, the energy is scattered and partially reflected back to the radar site. The data is then interpreted by the radar, including the strength of the reflected energy and how long it took for the energy beam to reach its destination and then return back to the radar. The data is then extrapolated into a visual medium so the data can be interpreted via radar screens. The average energy output of a NEXRAD radar beam is around 750,000 watts of power. That may sound like a lot, and in a sense it is, but compared to a hurricane, that is nothing. According to NOAA, the average output of kinetic energy from a hurricane is around 1.5 times 10 to the 12th power every single day. That's about 1.5 trillion watts of power every single day. Safe to say, there is no way NEXRAD radar can influence hurricanes. The second big technology conspiracy theorists often point to in terms of weather modification is known as HAARP. HAARP stands for the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, and it's located in Alaska. The HAARP research facility began construction in 1993 and finished completion in 1994. The goal of the program is to study the ionosphere, which is an atmospheric layer that stretches about 50 to 400 miles above the surface of the Earth. HAARP was formerly operated by the U.S. Air Force before operational control was handed over to the University of Alaska Fairbanks in 2015. Now, the specific piece of equipment that seems to rustle conspiracy theorists' feathers at the HAARP facility is the Ionospheric Research Instrument, or IRI for short. This is not just one device, it's an array of 180 radio antennas spread out across 33 acres of land. The array functions by sending radio waves, albeit much more powerful than the ones seen in NEXRAD radar, into the ionosphere. The goal behind this process is to temporarily stimulate localized areas through heating of the ionosphere in order to study the effects it has. The IRI puts out a maximum power of 3.6 megawatts, or around 3.6 million watts of power. Again, quite a lot of energy, but that absolutely pales in comparison to the incredible 1.5 trillion watts that a hurricane can produce each day of its existence. The raw energy output isn't the only reason that the stuff at HAARP can't influence hurricanes. This energy is deposited into the ionosphere, not the troposphere or the lower stratosphere where all of our weather happens. Storm systems simply can't reach 50 miles up into the atmosphere, so even if they somehow could tap into that heat energy caused by the radio waves, there's no way they could even reach that high. All of this information is publicly available for both HAARP and NEXRAD. Research and the data collected by these devices is not hidden at all. There's public websites for these things that are ran by the government, and as I've mentioned before, you can visit the National Weather Service offices that have NEXRAD stations, and I've even heard that you can visit the HAARP station. I'm sure that you need to set up times and stuff with them, but you can go and see what they do there. But now that we understand how both HAARP and NEXRAD work, let's look at some claims made by conspiracy theorists about their ability to steer or influence weather systems. Alright, let's see what the kind folks online are saying about HAARP and NEXRAD. It really is the Nazis that always say the dumbest shit, huh? Alright, next up we got this tweet here questioning if HAARP is generating wind to move the lower cloud base along faster. I'm not sure what exactly the point of that would be, because they're also bringing up chemtrails in this one, so maybe they think it's a chemtrail cloud. I already explained why clouds move at different speeds and directions earlier in this video, but it just amazes me how many people don't understand this stuff. And I also find the mental image funny that they're like, yeah dude, this thing that produces like 3.6 million watts of power is specifically targeting the cloud over my head right now. Stop trying to ruin my damn day. Here's another one claiming that there are no more naturally created hurricanes anymore, only ones that are created by the United States and Israel. You know, considering how far up Israel's ass the US government has been for almost a century now, I don't think it would be wise of them to start throwing hurricanes our way. I think that might strain our relationship a little bit. I actually want to elaborate on that post a little more because I've been seeing people on Twitter, weather Twitter unfortunately, start throwing this one around. You see on screen there is a old patent for a machine that could apparently modify, create, or destroy hurricanes and tornadoes. It was a patent filed to the US government in 2001, and it was abandoned in 2003, probably because it was a stupid idea, to be honest with you. I'm not gonna dwell on it for too long, but essentially they had the idea that they could put two sound generating machines that would create a frequency between 100 to 2000 hertz, and they would just beam it into a hurricane, and that apparently disrupts it, or destroys it, or can enhance it. The patent, as far as I read, doesn't really elaborate on how that would work. It just kind of happens, I guess. And yeah, you could see why that patent has been abandoned for nearly 22 years. But conspiracy theorists still say that the government can create or modify hurricanes and tornadoes based off of this patent, which is just patently fucking stupid. Okay, I want something a little bit more cohesive, try and hear a little bit more argumentation here. So let's take a look at some videos and see if we can get some more elaboration on these claims. Let's hear what this lovely lady has to say about hurricanes.
Call me crazy, but does anybody else find it odd that when we stop allowing them to manipulate the weather, and according to the left, Trump fired all of these people from the hurricane system, service, reporting, scientists, all of that stuff, we haven't had any hurricanes? This is the first September in 10 years a hurricane has not made landfall. You think that's really a coincidence? Because I personally believe they've been manipulating the weather all along, and hurricanes were always meant to stay out to sea and were never meant to come on land.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. Some of it we've already discussed in the video prior. No meteorologists have been laid off during the government shutdown, as far as I've heard. They're just not being paid for their work, which really sucks. Saying there's been no hurricanes, that's not true. There have been hurricanes, just a lot of them haven't made landfall this year, except Hurricane Melissa in Jamaica now that just made landfall today. So there's that, but otherwise it has been a pretty quiet hurricane season in that regard, but that doesn't mean that they haven't existed just because they're out in the ocean. And that claim there about how hurricanes have only started to make landfall because of weather modification and how they were always supposed to stay out to sea, that's just not true. Again, as I mentioned earlier, hurricanes have been making landfall well before we even had the ability to modify the weather in any way, shape, or form. So, yeah, I don't want to be mean, but that was just wrong on multiple levels. For our last example in this section, we're going to take a look at what might possibly be one of the craziest examples we've seen in this video so far. We're going to look at a video that seems to indicate that all weather systems in the US are spawned and controlled by NEXRAD radar sites. I'm not going to play the whole video because, frankly, the first 20 seconds are enough to make me think this person isn't doing well mentally. I don't think y'all need 3 full minutes of this. Your brain might melt like it got hit by a microwave radar beam and start pouring out of your ears from the sheer level of crazy that radiates off of this clip.
Staring at this satellite time-lapse, we can see the week started off with a straight line of clouds between KPUX in Boone, Colorado, and KBIS in Bismarck, North Dakota, followed by a pulse emanating from KPUX, causing the straight cloud line to form the tail of a spiral spinning around KBIS, which is then all pushed southeast into a compressed straight line of accumulation, all beginning again at KPUX.
Man, imagine living in the world of these people for a day where low-pressure systems and cold fronts are generated by the government. Jesus Christ, man, I can't imagine being this fucking deluded and uninformed about the weather. Can y'all imagine if I was a weather conspiracy theorist? Dude, holy I was just trying to get some sunlight, and out of nowhere it just started pouring, a torrential downpour like a hurricane. And look at the sky now. There's no dark clouds around at all. I don't even know how that happened. And like, look at me, I'm soaked from head to toe. And my ears are ringing like crazy. It must be that stupid
fucking NextRad site up in Jacksonville. I guess my hat didn't protect me from the radio waves this time. Does anyone smell burnt toast?
Before I get to the conclusion of this video, I want to just rapid fire off some posts real quick that I found to be interesting or entertaining to read, or admittedly sometimes just a smidge of crazy. All of these are going to be ones that could be debunked pretty quickly with just some basic knowledge of meteorology or just, some critical thinking skills. I'm going to call this the lightning round, so let's get it moving. Oh look, hurricane tornadoes. #collapse. So this tweet was actually made in reference to Hurricane Milton's tornado outbreak that happened in central and southern Florida last year. And yeah, tornadoes do in fact happen during hurricanes. Usually the primary driver behind that is as a hurricane starts to make landfall, there's a lot of friction between the land and the winds that are blowing over from the hurricane, and this can create some low-level shear and vorticity. This can spawn tornadoes. Usually these tornadoes are embedded in heavy rainfalls, they can be very dangerous, but thankfully they usually tend to be on the weaker end, though this wasn't exactly the case with Milton. There were 3 big EF3 tornadoes, and notably they were very photogenic, again they were very large, and they were also longer lasting. Usually hurricane spawn tornadoes are pretty brief. But yes, this is not some climate catastrophe thing. This has been happening for a long time, this has been documented for decades. Tornadoes occurring within hurricanes are nothing new and not particularly special. 12 years apart, the climate alarmist said we'd be getting regular EF6 by now. Alright, so this is in reference to the Enderlin EF5, which, if you didn't know, was the first confirmed EF5 tornado in almost 12 years, and that was a pretty big deal in the weather space. Climate alarmist, I guess if they're talking about weather weenies on Twitter, yeah, maybe, but I've never heard a professional meteorologist or anyone in the field start saying that we're going to start seeing EF6 tornadoes. That's not really a thing as of now. It is a fact that hurricanes do not naturally go above the equator. We've been under the controlled hurricane method for decades, weather modification, and the person below says that that's correct. This is actually wrong on multiple fronts. So what I think these people might be thinking of is that hurricanes and other tropical cyclones don't form directly along or near the equator. They usually form about 5 to 20 degrees away from the equator, because at the equator there is basically no Coriolis effect, which is a rotational force in the atmosphere that is caused by the rotation of the Earth. Without this rotation, thunderstorms and showers and tropical waves can't start to form a low-pressure warm core at their center, which is necessary for a tropical cyclone to form. But even if you wanted to say, okay, well, maybe hurricanes changed. Maybe they just, I don't know, started developing outside the equator once we started to learn how to modify the weather. Weather modification has been around as an idea, as a concept, for around a century, give or take, but we really couldn't even start doing things like cloud seeding until the 50s, like at least not practically, with planes and such. So, you would assume then that there was never hurricane landfalls before the 50s, or we'll be generous, even before the 1910s. But that's just wrong. There's historical records that have shown that hurricanes do form outside the equator well before this time, and they make it to land and they strike areas far away from the equator. So overall, this is just wrong. What are the mathematical odds that a hurricane would precisely hit Tampa? How about Appalachia? How about Houston? How about New Orleans? Why do they never hit in the middle of nowhere like they used to? Because that's no fun for the bad guys. Well, I don't really have specific mathematical odds as to why they occasionally directly hit cities, but all those places he mentioned, except for Appalachia, because it's kind of inland, but it's still in the southeast, it's because all of these places are close to either the Atlantic or to the Gulf, where there's a lot of warm ocean water, which is exactly what hurricanes and other tropical cyclones need to form. So that's why Houston gets hit, that's why New Orleans gets hit, that's why Tampa gets hit. And also to say that hurricanes never hit in the middle of nowhere, relatively speaking, that's just not true. Granted, there has been a lot of land expansion, so the middle of nowhere is kind of becoming a little bit harder to find, especially along coastal regions. But I could think of 2 examples recently where hurricanes hit in relatively low population areas. You had Hurricane Francine in 2024 that landfalled as a Category 2 in the southern parts of Louisiana, which, to my knowledge, is mostly just swamp and bayous before you get a little further north towards New Orleans and other small towns in there. And then you had Hurricane Idalia, which landfalled as, near Category 4 strength, either high end Cat 3 or low end Cat 4, which hit in the Florida Big Bend. And while that did impact some areas on the outer ends, like in near Tallahassee or near Lake City, overall the storm landfalled in an area where there was just a few small towns. And I'm not trying to downplay it and say no one got impacted, but in the grand scheme of things, by this person's definition, that's more middle of nowhere than if the hurricane landfalled, like, let's say, directly into Tallahassee. Anyone find it a bit odd that these only hit red states? Okay, well, again, it kind of goes back to the last example. The Gulf is full of really warm water, and that is what tropical cyclones need to form. And it just so happens that a lot of red states, a lot of heavily Republican states, are in the South. And where is the American South located? Right next to the Gulf. That's not a conspiracy theory, that's just geography with a bit of meteorology mixed in. No hurricane here in Texas, it's on the same ocean as Florida. Why? Texas is not a swing state. So I'm pretty sure this was in reference to Hurricane Milton, and Milton was not taking up the entire Gulf. That's probably why the weather was nicer in Texas than it was in Florida during that. Again, talking about politics and saying that Texas is not a swing state, but Florida is. If it was, I don't know, Joe Biden's administration controlling the hurricane to influence the election, it probably wasn't very wise to send a hurricane through some of the most Democrat-leaning parts of Florida, like the Tampa Metro or the Orlando Metro, or it didn't impact that far south, but near Miami. Like, really, any of the major cities in Florida tend to be more Democrat than the more Republican-leaning rural counties. So, if that was the big master plan, that was pretty poorly calculated. Alright, so this one was about one of the major hurricanes last year. I remember screenshotting this. I don't remember if this was about Milton or Helene, but either way, it doesn't really matter, because, as I will explain in a minute, it just has to do with strong hurricanes. The tweet here, though, says, "There is barely any rain for a hurricane and zero thunder and lightning. Very bizarre." Well, in terms of not seeing much rain, I'm going to have to assume this person was either nowhere near the center or even really the outer rain bands. If I could be real, this person was probably just posting from fucking Nebraska or something talking about this. And in terms of there being very little thunder or lightning, there usually isn't in hurricanes. The only time you really see a lot of lightning in hurricanes is either on the extreme outer bands when they're over land and they can tap into some of that better instability over land where there's more sunlight, or you see a lot of lightning in the very center around the eye wall of the hurricane where the most intense convection or thunderstorms are. And this usually only occurs over water and just up until landfall, because then hurricanes start to lose their structure once they hit land. So yes, unless you got really lucky in an outer band and saw some lightning, or you were literally sitting there in the eye wall of a Cat 3 or higher hurricane most likely, you're not going to be seeing much lightning at all with tropical cyclones. And that's because there's not a lot of higher cloud tops, there's not a lot of instability except for in the areas right around the center. So you're not really getting those storms reaching up into the freezing level, which is what helps encourage lightning. Funny how Weather.com's radar does not show the actual storm, just a puck. Weather Underground's app also doesn't show any storm in that area either. Weather.com radar right now. So this is in reference to Hurricane Melissa, which right now is a monster Category 5 hurricane south of Jamaica. And yeah, the reason you're not seeing it on any radar is because we usually don't stick radars out in the middle of the ocean. It's that simple. Purple is the signature photonic color of cold fusion energy, giving you all a sample of what quantum energetic magic used by the gods looks like in action above this totally fabricated hurricane that was diffused likely by Space Force using coherent scalar waves. Well, hey, if you wear one of these, that will just protect you completely from whatever the you're talking about. But no, seriously, the reason why the sky usually changes colors when there's a hurricane is a lot of the outflow coming from the top of the hurricane disperses ice crystals in the form of clouds outwards, and when the sun, the sunlight hits those, it usually causes some different colors. That might be one of just the Like, sorry, I'm at a loss for words. That is just some crazy dude. I'm sorry. Gulf of America odd cloud on the horizon looking west. This was from 7 days ago. Thank you to my friend Real Fishing Life. He was banned on X. Link in comments. So I think this ties back to the geoengineering thing, thinking there's like giant tankers out on the ocean that are spraying chemicals into the sky. That's not happening. And that just looks like a cloud on the horizon. And it probably looks a little weird because it's out on the horizon and the Earth curves. So you're probably not seeing the base of the cloud. These are neither desert dust nor tree pollen. It's raining yellow sand because of diabolical geoengineering. I'm not gonna lie, dude, that just kind of looks like pollen. And, you know, the whole desert sand thing, I'm assuming that's in reference to when you have, like, Saharan dust coming across the Atlantic during the tropical season. And some of that dust being mixed into the raindrops and falling down to Earth. I'm assuming it's one of those two things. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is some evil geoengineering chemical, but I'd love to know what chemical it is so I can look into it because yeah, I don't know, man. I see that like every single spring and summer here. Um, I kind of think he's looking a little too deep into it. These clouds have been growing from the ground upwards and spread with EMF. This is happening in the South Everglades near Naples. Okay, so this just looks like, the first picture just looks like a thunderstorm cloud, and the second one might be some sort of roll cloud or something like that. But generally, clouds, and especially thunderstorms, do grow from the ground up, not literally from the ground, but the boundary layer of the earth upwards. Usually, this is, especially since this is South Florida in October when it's still pretty warm down there, it's probably just surface based thunderstorms, spurred by daytime heating, or maybe there was a front or something nearby, but what they're describing is just exactly how thunderstorms work. And the more I look at this, I just like, these are some beautiful pictures, man. And I'm not trying to be a but like, can you imagine living like this? Like, you're out near the Everglades, one of the most beautiful natural places in the South and maybe in the whole US, and you're just sitting there molding over clouds, being like, oh, these fucking clouds are spawning from EMF or whatever and such. Like, dude, that must be a miserable life. Lockheed Martin data collection device falls from the sky. Dangling from the trees, a Lockheed Martin radio sonde, a data collection unit literally labeled on the side as a weather instrument. Military contractor hardware stamped made in Mexico, but instead of landing at a base or a lab, it crash landed in an unsuspecting civilian's yard. And it's not the only one. Just days ago, NASA gear plastered with NASA plus UMass Lowell stickers fell out of the sky onto a farmer's land. Since when do defense contractors and NASA drop weather tech onto civilians? Why are multiple data collection systems suddenly falling out of the sky this week, and why is nobody talking about it? Okay, I'm going to be real, I don't really know specifically why, if it was from military contractors or NASA. My best guess is they were probably trying to get local atmospheric conditions using these radio sondes for maybe test flights or whatever they need. Now, in terms of the National Weather Service and this weather tech, I've been there when they do these balloon launches at the NWS in Jacksonville. This is completely normal. They do it 2 times a day at pretty much every station in the country. That does vary due to some ongoing things with budget cuts and whatever, but generally 1 or 2 times a day they launch a weather balloon with a radio sonde attached to it. And the point of it is it goes up into the atmosphere and it collects a ton of data. Temperature, humidity, wind speed and direction, just a bunch of different things. And then it calculates parameters that are very useful for forecasting. These balloons do not have steering devices on them, so they can't just guide it back with like a little controller or something to their lab. That's not how that works. And even if the balloon just went directly up and didn't move at all, like, that's not even just possible though. Because again, as I discussed earlier in the video, the wind speed and direction changes with height. So usually the balloon goes like dozens, if not hundreds of miles away from where it was originally launched. So even if it could be steered, it would be having to fight the wind current the entire time up and all the way back down. So occasionally, yes, these pieces of equipment do fall into people's yards or on land of civilians, which is unfortunate, but that's just kind of how it goes. But the equipment itself, unless you get bonked in the head with it, I guess, is completely harmless. It's not going to hurt you. And that's why in the picture you see attached to the tweet, there's a phone number you can call. So if you don't want to have the equipment on your land or anything like that, you can just call the National Weather Service or whoever launched it, and they'll come and take it off your hands for free. There's nothing shady about this. I don't know why dude's trying to make it out to be a conspiracy. I don't know why he's trying to be all, oh, this is just happening this week and nobody's talking about it. Like, probably because this has been going on for decades, so, there's that. Meanwhile, out in the Atlantic Ocean, what in the fresh geoengineered manufactured storm hell is this then? And it's a water vapor imagery of Tropical Storm Melissa. And someone responds, it's not geoengineered, it's a change in our planet's atmosphere. Due to the shifting of the magnetic poles, these anomalies are only going to get worse. And then this follow-up really gets me. That and our weakening magnetic field. Hello, fellow observer. Hello, fellow observer, with a kissing emoji. Y'all are such fucking cornballs. But this last one right here, they are changing the poles to hide the Garden of Eden. Dude, where do I even start with this one, dude? Holy. Okay, so first of all, the whole pole shift thing, that's a completely different conspiracy theory. The magnetic poles on the Earth are starting to move, but conspiracy theorists think it's going to be a sudden shift that's going to bring on cataclysms and not just something that's gradually happening over time. Again, it's kind of like the other weather stuff where there's like a seed of truth underneath, but these people blow it like way the out of proportion. The dude saying that the storm was geoengineered. Tropical cyclones form over warm water. We've been over this multiple times. That's not geoengineered. And then they're changing the poles to hide the Garden of Eden. Wow. Okay, so this implies that they, whoever they are, can just change the poles whenever they feel like, which I don't know why they'd want to do that. And then they're doing it to hide the Garden of Eden from the Bible. Now, we can argue whether the Garden of Eden or if anything in Christianity was real or not. That's not what I'm here to do. But, like, let's just play for a second and say, okay, the Garden of Eden was a real place on Earth, let's say like 2,000 years ago. I'm pretty sure it is gone. It is likely buried under miles and miles of dirt and sand and water. But again, what would they gain out of hiding that from people? Like what? So people don't believe in Christianity or something? Like, good lord, dude. I don't even know what to say to this. Alright, to wrap up the lightning round, which didn't end up being that quick. This looks like at least 15 minutes. We're gonna go with this one because it's still the most insane one out of everything like I've seen and shown to y'all so far, at least in my opinion. The Garden of Eden one is close though. For anyone unaware of all the methods of warfare that have been used against humanity, here's one of them. There is a reason these two hurricanes will not hit land. We are using their own technology against them. And then, of course, Hurricane Aaron of 2001 was pushed to sea to make for a beautiful blue sky for the morning of 9/11. Okay, so again, we have to ask, who's they? And I'm guessing we're assuming whoever they are that supposedly steered Aaron away from the New York and northeastern coastline on the morning of September 11, 2001, along with they committing the terrorist attacks on New York. They also have the ability to steer hurricanes, so these are some powerful people. Do I need to explain why this is f***ing stupid? Like, dude, I'm sorry, but like, not only is this incredibly insensitive to even imply, in my opinion, to just be pushing conspiracy theories like that, like, do these people think the world is run by a bunch of theater kids that, like, perfectly frame everything that happens and it's all about optics and aesthetics? Like, it's so fucking stupid, dude. Do these people not have anything better to do with their time? Like, really sit down and try and digest that. Like, so someone went through the entire process of planning a terrorist attack, whoever they are, on New York, and they were like, oh shit, a hurricane's coming. I best... we gotta steer it away to make sure that we have a perfect sky for the video. For all the people who happen to be taking videos of the terrorist attacks on 9/11. Like, it just blows me away, dude. Like, I don't know what to say to this. This is just, like, insane. I want to end out this discussion of conspiracy theories with a question. A very simple question, but one that has a lot of answers. And that question is just, why? Why do so many people believe in these weather-related conspiracy theories, and arguably conspiracy theories in general? Well, for that, we're going to have to shift away from meteorology for a second and get into the realm of armchair psychology. While I'm sure every individual has their own specific circumstances in life and sets of beliefs and reasonings for thinking what they do or the way they do, I have noticed a few overlapping factors when it comes to the conspiracy theorist type. The first, and probably the biggest and most logical explanation behind this, is a lot of these people are simply misinformed. Pretty much every major topic I cover in this video, from HARP steering hurricanes and chemtrails, and the way the atmosphere moves, and all of these other little things I talked about, all of it can be explained pretty easily through some simple meteorological knowledge. And when I say meteorology, I'm not talking about some of the deeper mechanics involved, like thermodynamics or physics. Some of it is just as simple as understanding states of matter or the water cycle. You don't need to be a degree meteorologist to understand why the clouds move in a certain direction, or why hurricanes form, or why planes create contrails. Really, you just need a surface level understanding of the weather and how the atmosphere works. I genuinely believe if the education system was better in the US and we actually taught students, especially in the later parts of school, like junior and high school, about the weather and climate, probably like 80 to 85% of these posts wouldn't exist because these people would understand the basics, and usually people are messing up the basics when it comes to these conspiracy theories. And I do want to say that out of all of the reasons I'm about to go over, this is easily the most innocent reason as to why someone might be into conspiracy theories. They're simply misinformed. They weren't educated properly on the weather. So the best thing we can do is educate them and explain why these phenomena happen. The next big reason I noticed as to why people make up these conspiracy theories is they just have a colossal, massive mistrust of the government. And again, I've been over it in this video before, I'm not going to harp on it, but all I'm going to say on the matter is, we all know the government has done a lot of shady, f***ed up things to people. You don't have to come up with some fantasy shit to explain why you don't trust them. Another reason I think people get into these theories is that it gives them a sense of superiority along with a sense of community. It becomes a game of us and them, the believers versus the non-believers. The conspiracy theorists view themselves as some galaxy brain intellectuals, the ones that reign supreme over all of the sheeple who mindlessly consume the slop of science. They're the ones that see through the and this is especially prevalent on social media, where people have heads the size of a NEXRAD radar dome. I'm sure you could fit incalculable levels of ego into one of those things. Lastly, and arguably the most nefarious reason, I think there's a few people out there that just do it for the clout, the clicks, the attention, and the money that comes from it. I believe some of these pages genuinely don't believe the bullshit that they're spewing, but they know that outrage farming will bring them money and social power online. For people who simply care about the attention or monetary gain, what sounds like an easier route to the top? Posting genuine, informed meteorology that, let's be honest, most people find pretty boring, or they could peddle wild, bombastic conspiracy theories that take little to no effort at all. And now that platforms like Twitter and Facebook allow you to basically pay your way in, whether that be by boosting the amount of views that your posts get, or just straight up allowing you to monetize your page and your post, it's easier than ever to gain notoriety and money off of grifting conspiracy theories. Why spend hours learning about real science and taking your time to make sure you get your information right and that you understand what you're talking about when you can just go outside with your phone, take a picture of some contrails, slap a rage bait description that riles up the conspiracy nuts, and boom, there you go. You'll get thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of views. For those of us that actually care about meteorology and sharing good information, we care about the truth, and we most of all care about understanding our world, this sounds very immoral and illogical. And it absolutely is. But unfortunately, not everyone has the best interest of others in mind. Some people simply want to use the misinformed or the confused as stepping stones to further their own agendas, whether that be to make money and get attention, to further slander agencies such as NOAA or the NWS, to sow the seeds of division and fear in the population, or whatever else it may be. As long as their ideal version of the world is being forced on other people, it doesn't even matter how they get there, even if it means stepping on toes and dragging people down to their level. Frankly, I think it's disgusting, and going further, I think those that make weather-related content online should be much more keen on calling out the bullshit when they see it. It's easy to brush off everything I've discussed in this video as just people being stupid online, and it's all just internet noise. But there can and will be real-life consequences to these things, and it ranges down from the individual person to the highest levels of our government. What happens when people start distrusting the NWS because all they've heard for years is that NOAA and the NWS are trying to kill us all through weather manipulation? They're going to stop listening to warnings, and that can very easily get somebody killed. And even though I disagree with a lot of these people, and admittedly some of these people make me kind of angry with how much they grift, I don't think anyone deserves to die because they've been misinformed. But again, it goes further than just the individual. It also runs up to our government and the meteorological agencies under them. Just this year, much of NOAA's funding was up on the chopping block, and you had hundreds of meteorologists from both the NWS and just all of the other programs under NOAA be fired and lose their jobs over government cuts. Can you imagine living in a world where you're going to have to get most of your weather information from some weather weenie on Twitter or AccuWeather? I'm making a joke, I'm trying to make light of it, but seriously though, can you imagine that? Like, that'd be terrible. Imagine having to live through hurricane season in the south every year, or the winter up north, or the severe weather season in the plains, and you don't have accurate, reliable information to let you know what's coming, where every single voice online is going to be saying something different and you don't know what's true. I'm not trying to say that NOAA and the NWS are infallible and that they can't make mistakes. That is absolutely not true. But frankly, I think a vast majority of the time they do a fantastic job. I've been to the NWS in Jacksonville, and I've met the meteorologists that run these stations. They're fantastic people, and they care a lot about the weather in the communities that they serve, which is more than I can say for most of the weather communicators I see online, or even a lot of the meteorologists you see on TV through traditional media. The truth is, Mother Nature is going to do whatever the hell she wants, whether we like it or not. So, what do you do? Do you stick your head in the sand and ignore all the negative chatter, or stand up for what's right and actually give a damn about the world we live in? At the end of the day, we're all living under the same sky, and personally, I think it's in our best interest to work together so we can understand and survive this world that we all have to be in together. I know I'm going to keep fighting for the truth, and I hope y'all come along with me. Alright, I think that's about all I have to say in regards to weather conspiracy theories for now. I hope y'all enjoyed the video, and I hope you enjoyed this new style of content. I know, for me, it was pretty damn fun to make. I'm going to try and incorporate more weather commentary and weather communication type videos in with my more usual grounded analytical videos and the historical events I cover. But in terms of this style of content, as I mentioned, I didn't have enough time to really go over every weather conspiracy theory out there. So if you want to see a part 2, like I said earlier, make sure to leave a like and tell me that you want to see it again in the comments down below. And feel free to leave any suggestions of what you want me to cover next. If the reception to this video is positive, then yeah, we'll go for a part 2. So what do y'all think? Was I a little too harsh on the weather conspiracy folk, or was this type of call out a long time coming? Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Thank you again for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and consider subscribing if you haven't already. It really helps the channel out, and it lets us know that you enjoy what we do here. I really hope y'all had fun, and I also hope to see you again in the next video.